It started like every other mundane Saturday morning in our suburban cul-de-sac, the hum of sprinklers and lawnmowers blending with distant laughter from children playing outside. But when the first knock came at the door, sharp and insistent, I knew something was wrong. My husband had gone to pick up supplies for the garden, and I was alone with our son, Ethan, a 22-year-old Marine recently returned from deployment. I opened the door to see the familiar, smug faces of the HOA enforcers, Karen's minions, armed with clipboards, cameras, and an arsenal of passive-aggressive threats. Their eyes flickered with condescension as they rattled off complaints about the garden layout, the flags I had proudly hung for Independence Day, and some vague accusations about property lines they swore I had crossed. I smiled politely, pretending to be frazzled, letting them think their intimidation had worked. They didn't know what they were walking into. Ethan had heard their chatter from the living room, and when he stepped to the doorway, his posture rigid, his presence commanding, the air shifted immediately. He was in uniform, the Marine insignia bright against his olive-green attire, every inch of him radiating authority and discipline. The moment he appeared, the group faltered, their confidence wavering for the first time. Karen's orchestrated army of intimidation had always relied on the assumption that we were ordinary, compliant residents. They hadn't counted on him, or on the fact that I had spent months gathering evidence of their harassment. I watched quietly, recording everything, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and pride. The confrontation escalated quickly. Karen's lieutenant, a portly man named Sheldon, attempted to assert dominance, waving his clipboard and pointing at our lawn, citing regulations that didn't exist. Ethan didn't move a muscle but spoke firmly, correcting their false claims, explaining the legal boundaries, and even referencing the county codes they had misrepresented. Karen, usually the loudest and most aggressive, stepped forward, expecting to reclaim control with her patented mix of yelling and theatrics. Instead, she froze, her confidence faltering as she realized the facade was crumbling before her eyes. Our neighbor, Mr. Thompson, came to watch from across the street, holding his phone up, capturing the scene. Then came the twist I hadn't anticipated. One of Karen's enforcers, a woman named Linda who had been hesitant and visibly uncomfortable all along, stepped back and quietly whispered to me that she had documented evidence of Karen falsifying notices and threatening residents to coerce compliance. She handed me a USB drive, her hands shaking. That small, unexpected act of courage became the linchpin of our response. It wasn't just my son standing tall. Now we had undeniable proof that Karen's so-called authority was built on lies and intimidation. I discreetly slipped the USB into my pocket, keeping it safe as the confrontation continued. Karen's army attempted to push forward, but Ethan's presence was commanding. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood, every inch the embodiment of Marine discipline. And when they tried to advance with paperwork and empty threats, he calmly asked them to leave, citing the documents and recordings I had gathered over the past months. The group looked at each other, unsure, realizing that their usual tactics, pressure, noise, and bullying would not work here. One by one, they backed away, muttering excuses, shuffling their feet, and finally retreating down the street as if a force unseen had pushed them back. I couldn't help but grin as Karen herself tripped slightly on the curb, her face red with fury and humiliation, and stumbled into her minions who were scrambling to escape the scene. The aftermath was just as satisfying. I presented the USB drive and all recordings to the local authorities, who immediately launched an investigation into Karen's HOA. Complaints from other residents poured in, corroborating every incident of harassment, false notices, and intimidation. Karen tried to spin the story online, calling my family overreactive and exaggerating the events, but every post she made was countered by screenshots, videos, and witnesses from our street. Her reputation, carefully maintained for years, crumbled under the weight of truth and public scrutiny. Neighbors who had once quietly endured her tyranny began to speak up, sharing stories of fines, threats, and petty intimidation. It became clear that Karen's power was built not on legitimacy but fear, and once that fear was confronted, the whole facade collapsed. Ethan's disciplined calm had not only protected us but inspired our community to reclaim control over their own lives. Karen was forced to resign her position in disgrace, her minions disbanded, and local regulations were rewritten to prevent such abuse from ever happening again. By the time the sun set, our lawn, our porch, and our street were peaceful again, filled with the quiet satisfaction of justice served. I hung a small handwritten sign near our door, simple yet pointed: "Courage defeats tyranny." It wasn't just a message for Karen, it was a declaration to the neighborhood, a symbol that standing up to abuse, especially when armed with truth and integrity, could bring lasting change. The lessons were clear: courage, preparation, and the unexpected allies we discover along the way can turn even the most intimidating bullies into shadows of their former selves. The following week brought an intensity one hadn't fully anticipated. Karen, humiliated and exposed, began scrambling behind the scenes, attempting to regain control over the narrative. She started sending passive-aggressive emails to residents, spreading subtle rumors that we had somehow manipulated the situation. But the community had seen her face, her defeat, and her minions scattering like frightened rats. Even the most loyal of her enforcers now looked uneasy, glancing at one another in meetings as though uncertain where their allegiances should lie. My son, Ethan, remained quietly vigilant. His presence had already altered the power dynamic, and I could see him weighing each potential escalation, always calm, always disciplined, the embodiment of marine foresight. It wasn't just about ego anymore. Karen had opened a door that no amount of bluster could close. At the HOA office, she attempted to convene an emergency session to reassert her authority, but the board members, already shaken by the evidence we presented, refused to participate. The official minutes of the HOA meetings, once easily manipulated by her, were now scrutinized by residents armed with our recordings and the USB drive. Karen's attempt to control her narrative dissolved further when she realized the county had opened an investigation into her conduct. Allegations of harassment, falsifying documents, and coercion of residents were being taken seriously, and subpoenas began arriving for her and her associates. The twist that surprised everyone and nearly knocked Karen off her feet came during a community gathering organized to discuss neighborhood reforms. I had invited Linda, the whistleblower among her enforcers, to speak anonymously. She revealed, through a pre-recorded statement, how Karen had orchestrated schemes to extort fees from residents under false pretenses. Every lie, every intimidation tactic, every falsified notice was cataloged, presented, and explained. The room was silent except for the occasional intake of breath, the weight of truth settling over the crowd like a tidal wave. Karen, sitting in the back, her face pale, struggled to speak but was drowned out by the evidence and the unanimous support for the community's new regulations. It was a dramatic moment, a complete inversion of the power she had once wielded so effortlessly. Neighbors began to take action, too. Inspired by Ethan's disciplined confrontation and by the courage of whistleblowers like Linda, residents started documenting their experiences with the HOA. Old emails, screenshots of threats, and photographs of spurious notices came forward. The local media caught wind of the story, sending reporters to cover the unraveling saga. Karen's desperate attempts to spin the events on social media only amplified her exposure, as each post was countered with irrefutable evidence and first-hand accounts from multiple residents. Her credibility evaporated, replaced by public ridicule and mounting legal scrutiny. The showdown came when Karen, in a last-ditch effort, tried to intimidate us with a visit from a legal advisor she claimed was authorized to settle disputes. Ethan met them at the door again, calm as ever, and asked to see the official documents. When the advisor produced paperwork that was clearly fabricated, Ethan's steady hand and measured voice guided the situation with precision. He calmly explained the discrepancies, referenced county codes, and even cited case law that invalidated their claims. Karen's face went red, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to argue, but her words lost in the weight of reason and law. The advisor, realizing they had walked into a legal trap, muttered apologies and retreated, leaving Karen flustered and powerless once again. The final blow to her crumbling authority was delivered through the HOA board's official channels. Armed with our evidence, the newly aware residents voted overwhelmingly to remove Karen from any position of influence. Legal action followed. Karen faced fines, restitution, and mandatory training on ethical conduct. The county formally censured her for her repeated violations, and her HOA license was suspended pending further investigation. The once feared figure became a cautionary tale, a vivid illustration of how power built on intimidation and lies cannot withstand truth and resilience. In the weeks after her removal, our neighborhood transformed. Meetings became transparent, complaints were addressed systematically, and residents felt empowered to voice concerns without fear of retaliation. Ethan, who had returned to his base after the whirlwind of events, left behind a legacy of courage, discipline, and the understanding that standing firm against abuse could inspire collective action. Our home, once the target of harassment, became a symbol of accountability, truth, and justice. Even Karen herself could not escape the consequences of her actions. Once the town's formidable HOA president, she now faced ridicule from former allies and neighbors alike. Social media posts circulated widely, detailing her failed attempts at intimidation, the legal penalties she incurred, and the public exposure of her fraudulent practices. She became a figure of caution, a warning that authoritarian behavior, no matter how entrenched, would crumble when confronted with courage, evidence, and the unexpected force of integrity. In the final moments of closure, I placed another wooden sign on our porch, handwritten and simple: truth and courage prevail. It wasn't a message of revenge. It was a testament to the resilience of ordinary people, to the power of preparation, and to the unexpected heroes who rise when injustice strikes. The neighborhood felt renewed, and the culture of fear that Karen had cultivated was replaced with transparency, accountability, and mutual respect. Looking back on the entire ordeal, the lessons are clear. Standing up to abuse requires more than anger. It requires planning, courage, and a willingness to confront deceit with evidence. It requires inspiring others to act, to reclaim their voices, and to ensure that those who exploit power are held accountable. Karen's reign was dismantled not through force alone, but through strategic truth, unwavering courage, and the presence of one Marine who turned intimidation into an opportunity for justice. Now, dear readers, consider this. When facing systemic abuse and intimidation, is it always right to confront head-on with strategy and evidence? Or are there moments when restraint and patience carry their own power? Share your perspective and weigh in. How far would you go to defend truth? And what does true courage look like to you?